Today we're going to be comparing common AD force recovery methods versus Cayosoft's one-of-a-kind patented approach for AD force recovery. So let's dig into some common recovery scenarios. Well, the first one we all probably heard of is ransomware. So cyber attacks and Active Directory corruption as well. So it could be from ransomware, but it also could become from wiper attacks, or maybe a bad schema or other change in the environment. I can actually relate to the bad schema one. Earlier on in my career, I was actually doing a update for an Active Directory domain consolidation, and I ran a script that caused some corruption in the schema, which forced me to recover. It could be third-party software on domain controllers. Think about the CrowdStrike incident that happened that did impact Active Directory domain controllers. Or maybe we just need to recover unwanted object changes or attribute changes, right? More common and can be hard to troubleshoot. Changes to users, groups, group memberships, licensing, etc. So those are some common recovery scenarios of Active Directory. So let's look at some AD recovery methods. The first one being Windows Server Backup, right? Windows Server Backup offers basic backup and recovery for Active Directory, but it really lacks granular recovery and fast restoration capabilities. It's suitable for basic protection, but not really built for Active Directory. It would be good for maybe a file server or maybe even a web server, but certainly not Active Directory. Then we have enterprise backup tools. So enterprise backup tools, they're giving us some more comprehensive solutions, maybe with some granular recovery capability, but they weren't really tailored for Active Directory. They can be resource intensive and maybe even need specialized expertise from someone in the organization. And again, they weren't really intended for restoring Active Directory in an environment. And now then there's third-party dedicated AD backup tools. Again, these tools are designed for AD backup and recovery. They offer some granular recovery, maybe even some fast restoration from ransomware protection, but they do provide a better solution for your critical AD data than traditional Windows Server or enterprise backup tools. So they are getting better in that case. But now what we're going to talk about is instant AD recovery with standby forests. This is really a game changer from organizations. These tools enable automatically fully tested recovery to clean Active Directory standby forests, allowing instant recovery of your AD forest environment. Understand that Active Directory full forest recovery is very complex. For each domain in the forest, there's a long list of tasks that must be completed for a full recovery. And that includes things like finding the DC backup, install an AD on new machine, restore, isolate domain controller, configure network, restart DC. All of these steps are very complex recovering Active Directory. Again, this is way more than just restoring maybe a SQL server or a file server in your organization. So it really needs to have dedicated tooling for this, for the recovery process. Again, multiple steps here. And you can see it goes on and on. But that's not just the only challenge. So testing of Active Directory recovery often doesn't get done, and most plans fail on execution. Why is that? Well, they have unvalidated backups. Backups are assumed to be clean, but they can restore attacker persistence, things like SID history, GPO malware, DC shadow, or even golden tickets. Many organizations have never conducted a full forest recovery test in an isolated environment. And it's all or nothing. AD recovery is often done all at once, leading to cascading failures and reinfection. It could create infrastructure gaps. Recovery efforts are often blocked by maybe missing domain controllers, maybe DNS failures, and even replication breakdowns. But that's not the only reason why it fails. We have to worry about recovery reinfection. Traditional recovery often fails when attackers have embedded persistence, restoring from backups. So now let's say we're going to get our backup, but it includes the operating system and hardware dependencies. So we could have embedded malware. And then this one's very hard to address. Persistence, as I mentioned, persistence mechanisms that survive traditional recovery. Silver tickets, SID history, admin SD holder, golden tickets, could be group policy changes. These are all hidden techniques that are often added during a ransomware attack. So now that we understand the challenges around traditional backup and those methods, now let's understand the impact on the business. So the first thing is operational disruptions. When Active Directory goes down, it's not just an IT problem. It actually causes a business outage to an organization. Active Directory plays a critical role in majority of your business is supporting your applications, your cloud resources, your corporate data. your single sign-on. And then this can lead to financial losses. The downtime and disruption caused by an AD outage can result in substantial financial losses. Reputational damage, or collateral damage, I'll call it. An Active Directory outage can harm an organization's reputation, especially if it leads to data breaches or prolonged service disruptions. But it's not just reputational damage. If you're a healthcare organization, these outages can actually lead to patient healthcare issues. So again, these are far beyond what traditional outages would cause. So Active Directory is integrated within your business fabric. So now let's understand the role of an isolated standby environment. Well, it allows you to restore Active Directory in an isolated cloud environment. It focuses on restoration of AD components. There's no operating systems or hardware dependencies. It's restored on clean patched cloud VM templates that are malware-free and ransomware-free. You can do post-analysis for AD persistence of threats. It also validates object integrity before reconnecting to production, preventing reinfection by blocking old domain controller credentials. So let's look at Cayosoft Guardian Forest Recovery Standby Environment. Recover instantly. Backup and recovery plans include domain controller recovery, promotion, DNS configuration, all of those steps that I mentioned, plus much more. It guarantees recovery. Easily and frequently test your disaster recovery plans effectively in an isolated cloud environment. It eliminates reinfection, so eliminate the risk of reintroduction of rootkits, ransomware, and other malware during recovery, because we're only backing up what's required for Active Directory recovery. No operating systems, no hardware dependencies, so no vulnerable device drivers. And we're recovering on clean cloud VM templates in either Azure or AWS. This streamlined, backing up only what is required for AD4s. So let's take a look at this. So customer data center. So we have Guardian Forest Recovery that is automatically scheduled to perform a full standby recovery in your cloud environment. This here represents an Azure environment. So what am I talking about? On a scheduled basis, it automatically will go out and recreate your Active Directory forest in a clean, isolated, standby cloud environment that's fully tested and then powered off, so it prevents reinfection from potential ransomware or other malware in your environment. So let's understand how Cayosoft bridges security, resilience, and operational excellence together. Cayosoft Guardian Forest Recovery includes change monitoring and real-time alerting, as well as threat detection. Instantly roll back unwanted changes. Object and attribute recovery. Instant forest wide recovery. You get back to business fast. You can use Cayosoft Administrator to also prevent mistakes and malicious changes, easily automate common admin tasks, and force least privilege administration in your organization. So now let's go in and look at the product that we're talking about, Cayosoft Guardian Forest, and its instant standby forest recovery process. And what I'm talking about is Cayosoft's instant standby forest recovery. So let's understand like some of the major components. So the first thing you want to do is add in your cloud services. So we can add in our Azure subscription, but we can also support AWS for standby forest recovery. Once we add in our cloud services, AWS or Azure, then we want to configure our backup location. And for standby forest recovery, we certainly would recommend using cloud storage. So we support both Azure Blob Storage and Amazon S3. And then lastly, we also support network sharing drives as well. Once we do that, once we define that, we basically set up our backup plan. So our backup plan is going out and telling us what we want to back up in our environment. So we can see that we basically have these different properties that we've configured as part of the backup plan. You can set it up daily, which domain controllers, settings. It uses the backup locations that we've configured here. Backup history, we can define how long we want to keep our backup or notifications. You can set up email notifications. And then once we have that, then every night we have our recovery plan. And we support multiple recovery plans, but the one I'm focused on today is going to be around Cayosoft Standby Instant Forest Recovery Plan. And we can go in and see what that would look like. So again, here we can go in and look at our recovery plans in our environment. As you can see, we had basically the standby forest recovery that's going out and performing the recovery, creating the recovery site, so deploying all the necessary resources for me in Azure. Once it deploys the recovery site, it starts taking that backup and then building it out, installing BitLocker, configuring Windows Update, handling all the TCP/IP configuration, installing Active Directory services. Remember, the backup's getting restored on a clean cloud VM templates that are coming from Azure and AWS. Restoring the Active Directory database, isolating domain controllers, resetting the 𝗦𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗶cie account password, so we're invalidating golden tickets, we're disabling, we're raising the RID pool, all of those things that are required to restore a working Active Directory. And then again, we perform it for the other domain controllers in the environment. And then lastly, what do? We go in, we verify that everything's good, and then we power it down. So we know that it's a working Active Directory, and you can see here I've powered down those machines. So actually, let's go in and look at this object Azure environment. So let's go in and look at my recovery plan. I'm going to go grab my recovery plan and just go to one of my recovery locations. So we're going to just open this up through Azure portal, and now I'm going to log in here. And now here you can see we're in the recovery site, and we have all of the necessary infrastructure to then basically have this standby force recovery. So let's say we were in an outage. Now what we need to do is power up this domain controller and then go in and make some very basic networking changes, and then that would allow the organization to point back to this standby force recovery during a ransomware or an Active Directory outage. So again, very simple to perform, automatically goes out on your schedule, will go out, back up your Active Directory, only backing up the required metadata for Active Directory, restoring that, recreating everything in your cloud environment, either that be in AWS or Azure on clean VM templates, restoring the full Active Directory backup on those new object VMs, verifying that it's a working Active Directory, and then powering it down to prevent ransomware infection, as well as saving organizations' system resources from cloud compute. So that's how we do Cayosoft Guardian Standby Force Recovery. Thank you for joining us.